Hi, it's Mark Boster, producer of the Pawlik Automotive podcast video series. We're here with Mr. Bernie Pawlik, Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver. Of course, 20-time winners of Best Auto Repair in Vancouver as voted by their customers, including this year, 2019, and 38 years repairing cars in Vancouver. And how are you doing this morning, Bernie?
Good. Very
That's
good.
excellent. So we're going to talk about BMW, the ultimate driving machine. The reliability thereof. Are BMWs reliable?
Well, it's a pretty broad question. There's, BMW. There's a huge lineup of vehicles from, your sort of, your sort of basic 3 Series sedans up to, luxury SUVs in the X5. Compact SUVs. We've got some very nice sporty models, including like the Alpina, which is I hope I said that properly, which is a kind of a AMG-ish type version of a BMW, and the M series, high performance. So there's a lot of variety in BMW. I mean, you won't find any pickup trucks, but you'll find pretty much everything else.
So there's been some studies that claim that BMW is the most expensive car to repair. Is that what's your experience in the shop?
I'd say they are pretty expensive to repair. There's a lot that does go wrong with BMWs, not all models, but I would say, in a nutshell, you could expect to be paying more to fix a BMW than a lot of other brands of cars. Maybe not any more than a Mercedes or another equivalent European car, but there are a number of issues that happen. And I know the study you're talking about kind of compiled from a database of auto repair costs, and I believe it was acquired. I think it's from a mobile auto service or an online booking service, and they've kind of looked at the pricing of stuff. And so it is somewhat accurate, but I don't know that it's really a full sort of sample of the whole automotive marketplace. But I would tend to agree with that. Generally, they are definitely more expensive.
And of course, is it fair to say that for the brand BMW, we're talking about generalities. We're not necessarily branding or stating that they're X or Y, because certain models within any brand of vehicle that's made, certain models will be better, certain models, and not so much. Is that true for BMW?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a wide variety of issues in different models of cars, and I mean, we can talk about some of the more specific things, but I think generally some models are better than others. I mean, I think I've said this on my pod. My daughter owns a 2003 Series. It's a really reliable car. I mean, very little's gone wrong. And I know you had a 3 Series was maybe a little older that you had all sorts of problems with. And, we see other newer 3 Series where there's a number of things. So there are some common problems to them, but generally some are more reliable than others.
So let's work our way through. How are the brakes on BMW?
Brakes are generally good. There's not really a lot of issues in the brake department. Pads and rotors, of course, need to be replaced. Like it's a typical European vehicle where as the pads wear, they usually wear the rotors at the same time. So to do a proper job, you'll do pads and rotors. They also have an electronic wear sensor, which is, it's a little additional item that you won't find on a lot of North American or Japanese cars, but that's another item that needs to be replaced. But other than that, the brakes generally, they sort of have an average lifespan, 50 to 80,000 kilometer type of range. Some of the SUVs, they might wear a little quicker, but that's the general range. So brakes are good, nothing unusual in that department, and not overly expensive to repair unless you get into some of the high performance M series where the rotors and pads are oversized.
What about steering and suspension?
There's a few issues there. I mean, like control arm bushings, especially on some 3 Series vehicles, have been problematic for a long time, and they tend to wear out, and when you replace them, they tend to wear out really quickly even after that. So that's certainly something we see. There's some ball joints will wear out in the suspension. Other than that, pretty good, but there are some predictable parts that we'll see on certain models that will wear out, and these are mostly, I think, like the 3 and 5 Series.
What about engines?
So engines, well, there's a lot to be said for engines. BMW really has two once you get into the V10s, but 2 common engines. They have V8s, they have their straight 6 engine, which they've used for a long time. The 6-cylinder engine is, you get like some that are like a 2-liter, some that are a 3-liter, and they've just sort of changed the dimensions inside the engine to accommodate. But on the outside of the engine, it looks pretty much exactly the same. And of course, they modified them as technologies increased to, with variable valve timing and variable valve lift and all sorts of pretty nifty technologies. But I mean, I think the 6 cylinders generally are much better than the V8s. There's some problems with the V8s that can be, and again, I'm going back to kind of the early 2000 range where their timing chains would wear out, and it's just horrifically expensive to fix. So, like it's like 25 or 40 hours labor type of time. If you can just, multiply that by, $100 or $150 or whatever you pay for labor, it's, you can see that would be an extremely expensive repair plus parts. Coolant leaks are common on those V8s as well. And again, extremely expensive to fix. So I'm often I like power and performance, but I find those V8s I'd be kind of scared to own one. 6 cylinders, on the other hand, I mean, they do have their problems, but they're much more reliable in many ways. And some of the issues we see with the 6 cylinder, oil leaks, valve cover gaskets will leak, oil pan gaskets will leak, oil pan gaskets, valve covers, oil filter housings. I'm talking about a lot of different places here. Some of these oil leaks are actually pretty expensive to fix too. Like on an X drive shaft goes through the oil pan, so it's a very labor intensive job to change an oil pan gasket on many of these. So they do fail on most of them, so that is an expensive issue.
How about coolant leaks?
Coolant leaks, yeah, that's the other area. So a lot of coolant leaks have been kind of a common issue. Water pumps, a lot of plastic parts in the cooling system that'll cause leaky seals. And, some of these, again, I'm thinking kind of back a couple of decades, as the plastic gets old, it tends to get kind of brittle. And we've even had, parts in our shop where some of you just lean on the radiator and the radiator neck where the hose attaches will snap off because the plastic gets brittle and hard. So that's an issue, that's been common with a lot of BMWs. And I think if you're into preventative maintenance, you want to keep one for a long time. There's certain parts that, we can recommend you to replace just for reliability purposes, certain plastic hose ends and things like that. I think that kind of covers it for the cooling system. One other engine item that does tend to fail too, and a lot of the 6 cylinder, the crankcase vent valve is a pretty high failure item, and they will, you'll know it's bad. The engine, sometimes you'll start the engine, a big cloud of blue smoke will come out the back, or you'll have to you have to add a lot more oil than usual. Maybe a liter every 1,000 or 500 kilometers. And the check engine light may also be on with a rough running condition, depending on how badly the valve's deteriorated. But that's again a thing to fix. But now I know we've talked about a lot of problems here, but they're in favor of BMW. I mean, the general guts of the engine, like things like the head gaskets, are usually bulletproof, reliable. The pistons, the compression, like the internal workings of the engine, besides timing chains, tend to be extremely reliable. Like the valves, the pistons, the things that keep the compression component of the engine are generally very reliable.
So what about transmissions, the drivetrain, all-wheel drive? What about issues there?
Usually pretty reliable. I mean, the transfer cases can cause issues that, when the vehicles reach really high mileage, but they're generally pretty reliable and well built. We don't see a lot of transmission problems with BMWs. Again, pretty reliable. The drivetrains, drive shafts, differentials, they're all pretty good. CV joints, CV boots, they're all pretty reliable. Again, when a car gets really old too, and I'm saying old, like 12 to 20 years old, then a lot of other issues start to happen. But generally, that part of the vehicle is really quite reliable.
What about fit and finish, the interior and the body?
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, it's good quality. The components are generally well built and we don't run into a lot of problems. We're like things like power windows, again, we don't, fix a lot of problems with those. They tend to work pretty reliably. Yeah. Overall, that part of the car is usually pretty good. And one thing I realized about engines that I did miss is there's a lot of newer models that do have 4-cylinder turbocharged engines, and they're generally a pretty reliable option, and much better on fuel than some of the other models. So just jumping back to the engine category.
And how about electronics, electrical systems? Generally can be an issue with German cars.
Can be an issue. I mean, we don't see, again, a lot of problems with them. I mean, I do know someone who bought, I think it was an X3, may have been brand new, and she had a lot of problems with I think it was a navigation system or something, and the vehicle was in the shop for months trying to get fixed. And those are kind of irritating issues that you hope you have warranty on. But usually for the most part, the electrical and electronic systems are pretty good, which is great because there's so much to it that they could be problematic and expensive. And generally things are pretty good. As far as interior items too, like, heating and AC, again, pretty reliable. But I know some models, I'm thinking of the 3 Series, again, going back in the 2000s decade, the heater blower fans would tend to fail, start making noise or not work, and very expensive to fix. So the way they're designed, it's very labor intensive job plus an expensive part. So that's that is one thing that can be an expensive issue.
So let's pick on some here. Are there any particular models that you see a lot of?
We service a lot of 3 Series. We service a lot of X3s. Those are probably the most common for us in our shop. I think I've alluded to some of the issues. A lot of the issues I've talked about there would apply to those vehicles, with the exception of the V8 engine, because they don't put that in that model. You'll find the V8 in the larger 7, 5, and 7 Series and the X5 models. But yeah, I mean, I think I've kind of spoken. Most of the issues I've talked about are related to those particular vehicles.
What about X3s? I know that's a model you see a lot of. It has some quirks.
Yeah, I mean, I actually own one myself, so I can speak from personal experience. I mean, pretty reliable, but this vehicle, 100,000 kilometers, has had some oil leaks. The oil pan gaskets need to be replaced. The oil filter housings leaked oil. The electric water pumps failed. And, that's actually another item that BMW, they've gone to electric water pumps. It's an expensive part. So yeah, there are some expensive things that, in my opinion, not as reliable as they should be. I'm almost happy, when these kind of things start failing at around the 200,000 kilometer range instead of 100. Seems a little too young, in my opinion. But they're good running vehicles. The other thing, in little X3 issue, tail light. They have LED tail lights that quit working, and it's a manufacturing defect. There's a little module, little electronic board that turns the LEDs on, and they fail. They're just not made properly. So if you go to BMW, they'll sell you a whole tail light, but we can actually fix it. We've done the research and found out how to repair it for substantially lower cost. But that again is like a little quirky thing on the X3. Doesn't seem to, we've seen other BMWs where the tail lights fail, the LEDs, and you have to buy the whole light because it's a different design. But generally they're pretty robust and pretty durable.
What about the X5? I know that's another one that we've talked about a lot.
Yeah, X5 coolant leaks to me are probably the biggest thing on those. The earlier generation of V8s were really bad. The newer ones are better, and X5s do come with the 6-cylinder as well, which I think is a much more reliable option. So some of the things we talked about, problems with the 6 cylinders like crankcase vent valves, some of the oil leaks and coolant leaks. Those are the kind of things you're going to get with a 6-cylinder. But the V8s are, they definitely have their, they're more expensive coolant leaks from coolant pipes that run under the intake manifold and pieces like that. The older X series too, of the V8, the timing chains can be an expensive issue to fix as well. And one thing I'll say about an X5, I mean, it's an all-wheel drive, and a lot of them have very large tires on them, so they're not great on gas. But you don't buy a car like that for good fuel economy. Buy it more for the luxury, but they are kind of probably a little worse than they could be.
BMWs, what are the steps as an owner to kind of maximize the reliability of my BMW? What do I need to do in maintenance? Well,
regular service for sure. And this is a great question. Thank you for asking it. BMW's maintenance schedule is, they've got, they really try to stretch out the oil change interval. A lot of them are 24,000 kilometer oil changes. They've been using that for a long time, back into the early 2000s, even earlier than that. Late 90s, in my opinion, way too long for oil changes. The only time you'd ever really want to do that is if you're doing nothing but straight highway driving. So changing your oil for sure, but I would say every 12 to 15 is a much better time interval. You're much safer. You're gonna, you're still, that's a long interval for an oil change, and you're gonna be having cleaner oil. BMW also, a lot of their transmissions, they say you don't need to service them. They're fill for life fluid, but the fluid in them is no different than any other transmission fluid. The system works exactly the same. There's nothing magic about a BMW transmission, and changing fluid in that I would recommend doing that. So the brake fluid every couple of years, regular service is kind of the key for everything. These control arm bushings I talked about earlier. I mean, when they get bad, you'll hear clunks and things, or the brakes will feel a little weird. If you bring your car in for regular service, you'll know all these things and you can fix them before they become big problems.
So there you go. If you got a BMW in Vancouver, the guys to see are Pawlik Automotive. You can reach them at 604-327-7112 to book your appointment. You have to call and book ahead. They're busy, always busy. And of course, if you want to check out the website, pawlikautomotive.com, hundreds of articles and blog posts on there, videos on all makes and models and all kinds of repairs. Our YouTube channel, Pawlik Auto Repair, same thing, hundreds of them. And of course, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We appreciate it. Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for watching.